My name is Caroline Hartwell. I'm 58 years old, and this is the part of my story no one ever expected me to tell. For most of my adult life, I was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's support system, calendar keeper, meal planner, travel coordinator, silent partner, emotional cushion, and uncredited co-founder. I was very good at all of it. I knew how to disappear gracefully, how to make space, how to stay quiet. I called it love. I called it loyalty. I called it partnership. But that was before the night everything changed, before the gala, before the speech, before the moment I realized that after 30 years of building a life together, I'd been written out of it without even a footnote, so I did something that shocked everyone, including myself. I stopped waiting to be noticed and started taking everything back. This is not a revenge story. It's not about bitterness or scandal or how to burn it all down. It's about what happens when a woman stops asking for permission to exist inside her own life. This is the story of how I left the room, quietly, and walked straight into the one I built for myself. And in case you're wondering how it ends, it doesn't. Because for the first time in decades, this is just the beginning. The envelope was cream-coloured, thick, the kind that whispered money when you touched it. My name was written in gold script, Caroline Sinclair, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was from one of the charities I still donated to out of habit. But no, it was from Jonathan, or rather from his office. You are cordially invited to a private gala honouring the retirement of Jonathan Sinclair, Senior Managing Partner. The words sat heavy in my lap like stones. I read them once, then again, and then again, as if repetition might change the meaning. I hadn't known there was going to be a retirement gala, no mention over dinner, no suggestion that I might want to help plan, not even a heads up. Just this formality in an envelope, like I was some former colleague, or worse, a distant acquaintance. I placed the card back into the envelope with the care you give a delicate object you're not sure you want to own. For a moment, I just sat in the quiet of the living room, sunlight slanting across the carpet, the low hum of the dishwasher in the background, and wondered if it was strange to feel insulted. Or maybe it wasn't strange at all. Maybe it was just the next natural stage of invisibility. Jonathan always said he was terrible at surprises. But this wasn't a surprise. It was a signal, a sign of just how far I'd slipped out of view. 15 years ago, I would have helped choose the caterer, the wine list, the seating chart. 10 years ago, I would have written his speech for him. 5 years ago, I would have at least known what colour tie he planned to wear. But now, nothing. Just an envelope. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water and stared out the window at the rose bushes I'd planted 2 summers ago. He'd barely noticed them bloom. I remembered trimming the thorns myself, wearing gloves too big and thinking, maybe next year he'll help. He never did. I held the glass tight in both hands, as if grounding myself with the coolness. The gala was scheduled for Friday. Black tie. Waterfront hotel. Of course, the same hotel where we'd celebrated his promotion 23 years ago. Back then, he'd introduced me to colleagues as the real brains of the operation. People laughed, but it used to be true. Now, I didn't even rate a phone call. I sipped slowly. Should I go? Should I sit at a table with strangers and smile through clenched teeth while they toasted the man I helped build? Or should I stay home, order takeout, and pretend it wasn't happening? Either way, something was ending. I just wasn't sure yet if it was his career or my patience. I pulled the dress from the back of the closet like it was a secret I'd been keeping even from myself. Dark navy, silk, simple, but elegant. The same one I wore to Jonathan's partner promotion dinner 2 decades ago. I remember how he looked at me that night, like I was the crown on his head, like I was part of the victory. He used to hold my hand in rooms full of strangers and squeeze it 3 times. I see you, It meant, I love you. I hadn't worn the dress in years, but I slipped it over my shoulders anyway, letting the fabric fall into place. It still fit. That surprised me more than it should have. The zipper ran up without a fight, and in the mirror, I saw her again. That version of Caroline who believed in shared dreams and long plans. The woman who read Jonathan's contracts at midnight while their toddler slept upstairs. The woman who gave up her own practice when the firm offered him a senior role that required cross-country moves. We're a team, he said. What's mine is yours. The dress still fit, but standing there in front of the mirror, something else felt tight. My breath, maybe, or my silence, or the part of me that used to beam with pride just to be by his side. I touched the pearl earrings he gave me for our 10th anniversary. You always bring me luck, he'd whispered back then, kissing the spot just below my ear. That was the last time I remember him really looking at me. Not scanning, not nodding politely in passing, but really looking, seeing. The bedroom was quiet now, except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath my heels. I walked to the window, still dressed, and watched the light fade over the garden. That same garden I'd planted while he was away at conferences and business dinners and golf retreats with men whose wives always smiled too wide and spoke too little. I didn't hate him. That's the strangest part. I didn't feel rage or fire or even deep betrayal. Not yet. What I felt was distance. Like I'd been sitting at the edge of something for so long that I forgot there used to be a center. A shared center. Where we met. Where we mattered. I turned away from the mirror, smoothed the fabric over my hips, and whispered to no one. The dress still fits, but the life doesn't. And I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted it to. The valet barely looked up when I stepped out of the car. He handed me the slip with a practiced smile, but there was no warmth behind it, just the efficiency of someone who's seen too many arrivals and stopped caring. The hotel loomed ahead, glowing and grand, draped in string lights that flickered like 1,000 artificial stars. I walked toward the entrance slowly, heels tapping out a rhythm that sounded braver than I felt. Inside, the ballroom was everything I remembered, and everything I no longer recognized. Crystal chandeliers bathed the space in golden light. Jazz played softly beneath the din of polite laughter and clinking glasses. The room smelled of gardenias and expensive champagne. Every detail screamed occasion, celebration, wealth, and yet the air felt cold. I scanned the crowd, trying to find a familiar face, but everyone looked just slightly unfamiliar. Older, glossier, filtered through years I hadn't been invited to share. Conversations dulled as I passed. Not completely, just enough to notice. People's eyes flicked toward me and then quickly away like I'd wandered in from the past, like I was something they'd misplaced years ago and hoped wouldn't resurface. A server passed me with a tray of flutes. I reached for one, but he swerved slightly. Intentional or not, I couldn't tell. I watched the glass I might have held disappear into the hands of a woman behind me. She didn't thank him. She didn't notice me at all. I took a deep breath, smoothed the front of my navy dress and stepped further into the crowd. My name wasn't on any lips. No one called out. No one waved. Is that her? I heard it, low and sharp, from a cluster of women near the dessert table. One of them, tall, blonde, lacquered, tilted her head just enough to catch my eye. She smiled like it hurt. Jonathan's wife, right? I thought she stopped coming to these things. Poor dear. She looks like a relic. A relic. The word landed like frost on my skin. I stood still, rooted to the marble floor, a stranger in a room I'd once helped build. Back when Jonathan and I were building everything together. Back when people used to ask me what I thought, not if I'd still be attending. I looked for him, for Jonathan. But he wasn't near the entrance, not waiting, not watching. I was alone. I moved toward the side of the room, the part where the lights didn't reach so harshly. I needed a moment, just one, to catch my breath. to remember that I was not made of glass, no matter how invisible they tried to make me. But the coldness in that room, it was the kind that seeped into your bones. The lights dimmed just as I found a seat near the edge of the room, behind a tall potted fern that had probably cost more than my wedding dress. A hush fell over the crowd. The jazz stopped. The MC tapped the mic twice, then launched into a glowing introduction about Jonathan's legendary career, his vision, his leadership. People applauded. Glasses clinked. Someone let out a celebratory whoop. And then there he was. Jonathan Sinclair, my husband of 32 years, stepped into the spotlight like it had always belonged to him. He looked polished. Silver tie, perfect posture, just the right amount of humility in his nods as he accepted the applause. The crowd adored him. He began to speak, smooth, charming, that practiced blend of modesty and pride he wore like cologne. He thanked his mentors, two men I remembered hosting in our dining room over lamb roast and red wine. He thanked the partners who had challenged and sharpened him, and the board for their unwavering support. He even thanked the interns, yes, the interns, calling them the engine that kept us moving. And then he smiled. "There's one person in particular I have to acknowledge," he said, pausing just long enough to let the crowd lean in. "Someone who's been indispensable over these last few years. Someone I truly couldn't have done this without." For a moment my heart lifted. He turned slightly. "Chloe." The room erupted in polite applause as she stood from her table. Chloe, his new assistant, in a fitted red dress and diamond earrings that shimmered under the lights. She beamed at him like he'd handed her the moon. "She's been my right hand," he continued, "through some of the most critical transitions in this company's history. Her instincts, her organization, her loyalty. I owe her a great deal." Another round of applause. Glasses raised. Chloe dipped her head modestly, eyes cast downward like a practiced debutante. But I sat frozen, my hands clasped in my lap so tightly my knuckles ached. He moved on, to the future of the firm, to his hopes for retirement, to golf, to mentoring the next generation. But he never once said my name. Never once mentioned the woman who stayed up editing his pitch decks, who moved 3 times for his career, who held our children during every late-night meeting and business trip. He had rewritten our story in front of 200 people and edited me out entirely. The spotlight was bright and warm and loud, and somehow I had become the shadow behind it. I found her near the champagne tower, laughing at something the CFO's son had just whispered in her ear. Chloe. She was everything I expected, and nothing I was ready for. Tall, sleek, hair too perfect to be entirely her own. Her lipstick was bold, unapologetic. She moved like she belonged in every room, like every room had been waiting for her to arrive. I approached slowly, uncertain whether it was courage or curiosity pulling me forward. She turned before I said a word, as if she'd felt me coming. Her eyes flicked down to my dress, then up to my face, and something unreadable passed between us. Recognition, maybe, but not of who I was, of what I represented. "Mrs. Sinclair," she said, voice honeyed with just enough starch to sting. "It's lovely to finally meet you." "Caroline," I replied. "Just Caroline." She smiled, head tilting ever so slightly. "Of course. Jonathan speaks of you often." A lie, clean and polite and instantly soured on my tongue. "I imagine he does," I said quietly, watching her sip from a crystal flute with a kind of delicate defiance. She looked like a girl who'd studied power in books and mirrors, who'd memorized how to smile just the right amount while climbing every ladder in a designer heel. She leaned in, conspiratorial, like we were girlfriends at brunch. "He said you used to be in law," she said, "that you were brilliant." I caught the past tense like a hook in the ribs. "I still am," I replied. "Though now I spend most of my brilliance on silence." She gave a soft laugh. Not cruel, not kind, calculated. "It's a gift knowing when to step back." I blinked. "Is that what you think I did?" She didn't answer, Instead, she swirled her drink, eyes drifting toward the stage where Jonathan was now posing for pictures, basking in the curated glow of legacy. She turned back to me and said it so casually I almost missed the venom tucked behind the pearls. "You've had your time, Caroline. Some of us are just getting started." There it was. No claws, no shouting, just a razor slipped beneath velvet. I nodded, the way you do when the weather changes or the tide turns, or a girl with too much perfume tells you she's here to replace everything you built. I left her there, smiling, young, unstoppable, and walked toward the exit. But as I moved through the glittering crowd, something sharp and strange settled inside me. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't grief. It was the quiet certainty that I was about to become someone none of them had planned for. No one saw me leave. I moved through the crowd like smoke, untouched, unnoticed. The laughter didn't pause. The glasses kept clinking. Jonathan didn't look toward the door once. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. A woman disappears in pieces before she's gone all at once. First, her name stops showing up on invitations, then on speeches, then in memories. Finally, she slips out the door in a navy dress and no one asks where she went. The air outside was cool, almost tender, like it had been waiting to wrap around someone who needed it. I paused on the front steps, letting the hotel doors close behind me with a hush that felt too final. A valet looked my way and quickly looked away, probably assuming I was someone's mother, lingering too long at the edge of a younger world. The parking lot shimmered with tail lights and luxury cars, but I didn't move. I just stood there, staring out into the night like it might hand me an answer. It didn't. My phone buzzed once. A calendar notification. Our Tuscany trip next month. I was supposed to be confirming restaurant reservations and finalizing the wine tour. A gift, he said. 25 years married. A celebration. Except, what were we celebrating? That we were still legally tied to each other? That I could still fit into old dresses while becoming invisible in my own life? I opened my clutch and stared at the gift I'd brought for him, a small velvet box. Inside, a vintage watch I'd had engraved with coordinates. The lake house where he'd proposed, where he told me, "Whatever we build together." What a beautiful lie that turned out to be. I sat on the low stone wall near the valet stand, still holding the box, and watched as partygoers filtered out, flushed and glowing, high on champagne and compliments. No one looked at me, not even once. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger needs oxygen. And tonight, all I felt was stillness, heavy like silence pressed against glass. I slipped the velvet box back into my clutch and stood. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I didn't leave dramatically or slam a door or make a scene. I simply left. Because the truth is, when people stop seeing you, they don't need to push you out. They've already erased you. You just have to walk the rest of the way on your own. I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. I walked through the front door, slipped off my heels, and let the quiet swallow me whole. The house was clean, perfect, staged, like a catalogue version of our life. Nothing out of place, nothing personal. Just surfaces and shadows and the faint scent of the lilac candle I always lit when guests came over, though lately it felt like I was the only guest here. Upstairs, I opened the closet door in the guest room, not our bedroom, not anymore. I reached up to the high shelf where I kept things Jonathan had long forgotten about, things I told myself I'd sort through one day. Old tax folders, photo albums, and behind them all, the lockbox. It was heavy, not with gold or heirlooms, but with something far more dangerous. Memory. I carried it to the floor, sat cross-legged like a girl at story time, and opened the lid. Inside were fragments of a life too easily edited out. The first thing I saw was a yellowing folder labelled Sinclair and Blake, 1994. Our first partnership agreement, the one I'd written late at night while pregnant with our second child. My signature sat just below his, slightly smudged where the pen had dragged across my belly. Then came the letters, handwritten notes from Jonathan's early clients, thanking Caroline Sinclair, for the referrals, the advice, the introductions. "We couldn't have done this without you," one said. Another called me the hidden weapon behind the throne. I remembered those days when we'd talk strategy over dinner and fall asleep with blueprints on our nightstands. There were receipts, too, for the second mortgage I took out in my name to keep his business afloat during the 2008 crash. For the design firm I hired to brand his first solo venture. For the tailored suits I bought when he said image mattered more than ever. I had the proof. Not that he needed me once. He always needed me. But that I was there. That I helped build every brick of the life he now claimed as his alone. At the bottom of the box was a journal, my handwriting looping and smaller than I remembered. I flipped to a random page. "I feel like I'm slowly vanishing," I'd written. "The more successful he becomes, the more I dissolve. Is this what partnership means? Giving everything until you're nothing but the scaffolding?" I closed the journal and held it to my chest, forgotten, but not lost. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with the lockbox until dawn, surrounded by my own invisible fingerprints. And somewhere between page 13 and the mortgage receipt, I started remembering who I was. The sky was still bruised with the last traces of night when I picked up the phone. My fingers hesitated over the screen, not because I didn't know the number by heart, but because I did. I hadn't dialed it in nearly 10 years. Not since I stopped going to conferences, not since I started saying Jonathan's schedule is full, but I'll let him know you called. I stared at the name. Monica Thorne. A woman I'd once closed deals with in airport lounges and whispered strategy beside at industry dinners. She'd gone on to become one of the most respected private investors in the state. I'd gone on to pack Jonathan's suitcases and write thank you cards for his golf outings. I pressed call. 1 ring. 2. Caroline? Her voice was exactly the same, low, quick, just a hint of rasp like she'd smoked in her 20s and laughed too hard to regret it. "It's been too long," she said. "Too long," I echoed, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. There was a pause, not awkward, just aware. A silence between women who remember who each other used to be. "I was surprised to see your name light up. What's going on?" I stood at the window watching the first light touch the edges of the garden. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't timid. I was done waiting. "I'm ready," I said. "For what?" she asked. "To do something for me." The words came out so simply, so cleanly, I barely recognized my own voice, but it was mine, fully mine. Monica didn't laugh. She didn't say, "Finally." She just breathed out slowly and replied, "What do you have in mind?" I told her not everything, not yet, but enough. About the fashion startup I'd been quietly tracking. About the non-profit network I'd once helped build, now looking for new direction. About the women I knew, brilliant, overlooked, invisible, ready to rise if someone gave them the tools. "Caroline," she said after a long pause, "I think I've been waiting for this call for a very long time." And just like that, the shift began. Not loud, not cinematic, but a pivot, a tilt of the axis. I hung up and let the silence settle back around me. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt full, full of intention, full of return, full of the woman I used to be, and the woman I was about to become. David answered on the second ring, calm, courteous, completely unprepared. "Caroline, is everything all right?" "I need you to freeze all joint accounts," I said without so much as a hello, a pause. "Excuse me?" "All joint checking, savings, brokerage, the trust account, anything with both our names on it. I want them frozen as of this morning." Another pause. I could practically hear him sitting up straighter in his office. "That's significant. Have you and Jonathan? This isn't about what Jonathan and I have or haven't done. It's about what I'm doing now." More silence. Then, carefully, "Do you understand the implications of—" "I understand them better than anyone." I could hear him typing, Slowly at first, like he didn't quite believe I meant it. I didn't fill the space. I let the silence do the heavy lifting. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. All right. It'll take a few hours to update everything on our end. Are you also requesting separate access passwords and statements? Yes. And one more thing. I want a full printout of every transaction Jonathan made in the last 6 months. No summaries. Itemized. Understood. I hung up before he could ask any more questions. Next, I called Linda, our travel agent. She picked up with her usual chipper tone, the kind that used to make me feel like I was planning dreams instead of covering up someone else's distractions. Caroline, ready to finalize Tuscany? I've reserved the villa and the cooking class you loved, plus the wine tour with... Cancel everything. Her voice faltered. I'm sorry. The villa, the flights, the reservations, all of it. She paused. That trip was supposed to be your 25th anniversary, wasn't it? Yes. And now it's going to be my Independence Day. She didn't know what to say. I didn't offer her help. There will be cancellation fees, she murmured. That's fine. Send them directly to me. And update your records. Any future travel arrangements will be under my name alone. I ended the call and sat still for a moment, my phone resting against my leg like it was cooling down from the heat of decisions. It wasn't rage that moved me. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, steadier. The quiet reckoning that comes when a woman starts removing her name from someone else's shadow and carving it into her own foundation. No ceremony, no announcement, just a freeze, a stop, a line drawn so clean it could slice through glass, and for the first time in a long time, I felt untouchable. The receptionist smiled at me the way people do when they think you're lost. I gave her my full name, Caroline Sinclair, and watched her eyes flicker with recognition and hesitation. She stood halfway before speaking. Did Jonathan know you were coming today? No, she blinked. He's in meetings all afternoon. I'll wait. I said it with the kind of calm that doesn't ask permission. She sat back down, slowly, and picked up the phone. I could hear her whispering as I crossed the lobby and lowered myself onto one of the angular leather chairs they installed after the merger. Cold, sharp furniture for cold, sharp people. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The elevator dinged and Chloe appeared. Of course she did. Red blazer. Hair pulled tight like ambition itself. She didn't smile. Caroline, she said, voice crisp. Jonathan's in a time-sensitive negotiation. I'll only need a minute. She stood still for half a second too long, then turned with the tight grace of someone taught to never show a limp. Follow me. The hallway was sterile and gleaming, glass doors and silent phones, and the faint scent of eucalyptus from the overpriced diffuser at reception. I remembered when this firm smelled like printer toner and stale coffee. Back when we built it. Chloe opened the door to his office but didn't step inside. Jonathan was at his desk, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, looking surprised. Caroline? I closed the door behind me before he could stand. He started with pleasantries. Something about how I looked well, something else about being busy. I didn't respond. I just stood there, letting the silence scrape at him. Finally, I asked, when did I stop mattering to you? The words landed like a slap. Not loud, but unmistakable. His face stiffened. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said, but it's true. He looked down at his hands, then out the window, then anywhere but at me. You know how life moves. Things get busy. We? Jonathan, you haven't said my name in a sentence that didn't include logistics in over a year. That's not. You gave a 20-minute speech and thanked your assistant, the interns, your tailor for God's sake, but not your wife. He swallowed hard. It wasn't intentional. That's the problem. I stepped back, hand on the doorknob. You erased me, and you didn't even notice. Before he could answer, I opened the door and left. And this time, I made sure he watched me go. The safe was behind a framed photo of Jonathan shaking hands with a senator. I'd walked past it 1,000 times and never given it much thought, just another piece of his wall of achievements. But that night, I took the photo down, entered the 6-digit code I'd never forgotten, and pulled the door open. I didn't even know what I was looking for, only that I needed to see, really see, what I still had a right to. Stacks of files, each labelled in Jonathan's unmistakable block handwriting. Sinclair and Blake, 1996. Residential, Napa property. Board minutes, 2012. I pulled out the oldest first. Dust clung to the corners. My name was there on page 1. Caroline Sinclair, co-founder and original capital contributor. My signature, clean and looping, right beside Jonathan's. Underneath it, the clause I'd fought to include: decisions affecting ownership structure require unanimous written consent of both partners. Unanimous. That word hit me like thunder. I flipped through more papers. Documents I hadn't touched in years, some I didn't even remember drafting. I found tax forms with my name as the legal representative, loan agreements for properties I'd signed off on, contracts I'd reviewed, edited, notarized. My fingerprints were everywhere. And then, in a separate folder marked Personal Holdings, I found the house deeds, every property we'd purchased together. 3 homes, 2 vacation rentals, a commercial space in downtown Napa we never used. Every single one listed under joint tenancy with right of survivorship. He'd always insisted it was just paperwork. But paperwork had power. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something sharper, a kind of awakening. For so long I'd told myself I'd given everything to support him. But that wasn't quite true. I'd built with him. I'd signed every line, I'd taken the risk. And the proof was right here, in legal ink, not just memory. He couldn't erase me. Not from this. Not without burning the whole thing to the ground. I sat on the floor beside the safe, surrounded by pages of leverage he thought I'd forgotten. But I hadn't. Not really. I'd just paused, like a storm that holds its breath. And now, I could feel the air changing. He thought I was sentimental, that I'd folded my ambition into the laundry long ago and left it there. But I hadn't. I'd stored it, carefully, quietly. And now I was ready to take it all back, one notarized page at a time. Rebecca Martinez greeted me with a handshake that said she didn't waste time. Her office was clean, minimalist, except for one shelf behind her desk, lined with framed degrees and a single black and white photo of her mother. She gestured for me to sit and opened a legal pad with a fresh page. "I don't usually take walk-ins," she said, "but your message intrigued me." I slid the folders across the desk, documentation, signatures, contracts, deeds, everything I'd found in the safe, everything I'd scanned, labelled, and indexed like it was a trial exhibit. She flipped through the pages, eyes moving faster than her pen. 5 minutes in, she stopped, leaned back in her chair, and looked at me like I'd just handed her a blueprint to a secret vault. "Caroline," she said slowly, "you've built more than you know." I said nothing. She pulled a page free and held it up. This clause right here, requiring unanimous consent for ownership changes. Most wives don't even know where the operating agreements are, let alone that they negotiated a protective clause like this. I was practicing law back then, I murmured, her brows lifted. Clearly, and very well. She kept reading. "You're still on record as co-founder. You're listed as a guarantor on major expansion loans. Your name is on every deed. And you've got decades of paper trails proving financial contributions, strategic input, and co-management." She looked up again. "You've got leverage, Caroline. Real leverage. The kind people beg me to fake in court." Something in me loosened, not because I needed her praise, but because I finally felt seen, understood. My years of invisible labour, quiet strategy, second-row positioning, now every forgotten signature was a flag. "I want out," I said. "Clean. On my terms." She smiled. Not kindly, not politely, but with the satisfaction of a woman who likes the taste of justice. Then we'll take everything he tried to keep and remind him whose name is written on it. We went over strategy, asset division, communication protocols, timing. I took notes with the clarity of someone who'd just come up for air after a decade underwater. When I stood to leave, she said it again, softly, but with steel behind it. You're brilliant. I didn't deflect. I didn't blush. I didn't change the subject. I simply said, I know. And for the first time in years, I meant it. The house was too quiet, and for once I didn't mind. The echo of my own footsteps felt like company. I wandered through the rooms with a cup of tea, pausing in doorways like I was walking through a museum curated by a woman I used to be. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt like mine. Who is Caroline? I'd asked myself that question so many times in recent weeks that it no longer sounded rhetorical. It sounded like a challenge, a dare to remember. I used to love poetry. I used to sing in the kitchen when no one was home. I used to photograph birds from the back porch, badly with a second-hand camera and too much light exposure. I used to know how to be still without guilt. And then came the long years of planning dinner parties, remembering everyone's dietary restrictions, ironing Jonathan's shirts before a big pitch, prepping flashcards for the kids while reviewing merger documents at midnight. Somehow, in all that precision and responsibility, I blurred. I had become someone dependable, necessary, efficient, but not me. Now I wandered back into the guest room, the one I'd quietly claimed as my own, and opened the laptop. My search history was filled with things I hadn't dared look at in years: solo travel blogs, art retreats, second-hand camera listings. I clicked buy now on a refurbished DSLR. Nothing fancy, but enough to see. Then I booked a small cabin up the coast. 3 nights, alone. No itinerary, no spa package, no dinner reservations. Just me, the ocean, and silence. The idea didn't scare me, it thrilled me. I remembered a moment from 20 years ago, standing on a beach with a toddler on each hip, and Jonathan on a client call thinking, someday I'll come back here alone. I had no idea then how long that someday would take to arrive. I closed the laptop and sat still, the steam from my tea curling in the quiet. Who is Caroline? She is curious. Quiet, but not small. Strong, but not hardened. She likes rain and strong coffee and getting lost on purpose. She's learning how to be alone without being lonely. She's not afraid of mirrors anymore. She is not a relic. She is a return. And as I sat there, no one to report to, no one to manage, I felt it. A glimmer. A pulse. The woman I had been before the title of wife swallowed my name. She was still here, and she was ready to come home. We sat across from each other at the corner table of the same restaurant where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. Jonathan had made the reservation. He chose the wine. He ordered for both of us like it was still a dance we shared, as if choreography could replace connection. He looked good. He always did in public. Crisp shirt, fresh shave, the faint scent of the cologne I used to buy him every Christmas. He smiled like he believed it still worked on me. Maybe it once had. Maybe part of me had spent years hoping it would again. To us, he said, raising his glass. I raised mine but didn't echo the words. The wine was red, bold, expensive. It tasted like endings. He launched into conversation as if nothing had shifted. Updates from the firm. A funny story from the gala. Something about Chloe's dog and how it chewed through the corner of his briefcase. I listened politely, hands folded in my lap, letting him talk. He never noticed the way silence wrapped around my answers. Or maybe he noticed and hoped it would pass. I've been thinking, he said halfway through the main course. Maybe we should get away. Just the two of us. Paris, or back to that villa in Tuscany. I set my fork down carefully, the way I always had when I was trying not to break a moment. Jonathan, I said softly, you didn't even notice I left the gala. He paused, knife mid-air. That's not true. You didn't call. You didn't check. You thanked Chloe for holding your life together while I stood 10 feet away. His face stiffened, but not with guilt, with calculation. I was caught up in the moment, he said. It was a big night. For you. He shifted in his chair, leaned in just slightly. Caroline, don't do this. I smiled gently. I'm not doing anything. I've already done it. He blinked. I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the table between us. Simple. White. Final. What's this? He asked, though he already knew. Freedom, I said. He didn't touch it, didn't open it, just stared at it like it might vanish if he waited long enough. I gave you everything, I continued. My time, my name, my voice. I picked up my glass, took one last sip. Now I'm taking it back. We sat in silence as the waiter cleared our plates. The wine was warm, smooth, finished, and for the first time in 30 years, so was I. It started as a private letter, just something I typed late at night in the quiet hum of my home office, the curtains drawn, the house still. I didn't plan to share it. At first, it was just for me, a way to make sense of everything, to gather my thoughts like fallen leaves after a storm. But when I read it back, something inside me whispered, "This isn't just yours." I posted it the next morning. No drama, no accusations, just truth. I titled it, A Letter from the Other Side of the Spotlight. It began simply. For 30 years, I was proud to be Caroline Sinclair, wife of Jonathan Sinclair. Proud of our family, our life, our growth. I supported him through promotions, expansions, risks. I raised children while drafting contracts. I stepped back quietly when needed so he could stand taller. I believed in what we were building together. The response was immediate. Emails, messages, comments pouring in from women I hadn't spoken to in years, and from strangers who saw themselves in every word. I kept writing. For years, I edited myself to fit a role: wife, hostess, supporter, peacekeeper. I made myself smaller so his light could shine without shadows, and for a long time I thought that was love. But love doesn't erase you. That line was shared more times than I can count. People reposted it, quoted it. Not with outrage, with recognition. I don't share this for sympathy, I continued. I share it for the woman sitting in the passenger seat of her own life, wondering when she stopped driving. I share it for the woman who answers to Mom and Honey and Mrs., but hasn't heard her full name in months. I share it because silence isn't noble, it's just silence. I signed it with my full name, not Sinclair. Caroline Hartwell. It trended within hours. Blogs reposted it. A morning show reached out for comment. I didn't answer. That wasn't the point. I didn't want an audience. I wanted a voice. Jonathan didn't call. I doubt he knew how to respond. The letter wasn't about him anyway. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I'd packed away between dinner reservations and quarterly reports. The woman who once had ideas that didn't need his signature to matter. And when I shut my laptop, I felt it. Not triumph, not vengeance, clarity, not loud, not public, just quietly, unshakably mine. The emails came in waves, soft at first, then overwhelming. My inbox, once filled with appointment confirmations and department store sales, bloomed with subject lines like "thank you," "you put it into words," and "I thought I was alone." Some were 2 lines, some were essays. All of them felt like echoes of something I had only just dared to say out loud. One woman wrote from a women's shelter in Ohio. She said she'd printed my letter and taped it to her mirror. I read it every morning before I go to court. It reminds me I'm not crazy, just brave. Another was a CEO of a tech company. She'd been in Forbes twice but still cried in the parking garage every Sunday night. I've built empires for men who never once asked me what I wanted. Your words were a mirror, Caroline. A sharp one. Some letters came in the mail, handwritten in careful cursive. One arrived on rose-pink stationery from a widow who hadn't touched her art supplies since 1974. Your story made me open a sketchbook for the first time in decades. My hands still remember. I read them all. Every message, every paragraph, every thank you scrawled in trembling handwriting or typed from a phone late at night. I kept them in a folder, digital and physical, labelled simply, Letters from the Fire. Because that's what they felt like. Little sparks. Little pieces of kindling from women who had survived something invisible. Some didn't even name it, just called it the thing, or what we do, or the way we disappear. One note stuck with me more than the others. It was from a teenage girl, only 17. My mum read your letter out loud to me. She said, "This is what I never said." We sat on the floor and cried together. She's stronger than I knew, so am I. I closed my eyes after that one. It hadn't occurred to me that daughters were watching too. I never set out to be a voice for anyone else, but somehow, in telling my story, I had lit a trail for others to find their own. These weren't fan letters. They were signals, from rooftops, from basements, from kitchen tables and courtrooms and quiet offices with locked doors. I wasn't alone. None of us were. We were just waiting for someone to go first. And somehow, I had. I hadn't been back in nearly 40 years. The town looked smaller, of course. Everything always does when you're the one who's grown, but the air still held that same scent, pine and pavement and something faintly sweet, like old paper. Familiar, comforting, undeniably mine. I parked on Main Street in front of the little bookstore with the warped green awning. It was still there, still open. A miracle. The bell above the door jingled when I walked in, same as it had when I was 17 and learning how to stack hardcovers without knocking over the display. The owner was a woman in her 60s with silver hair tucked behind one ear and readers perched low on her nose. She greeted me with a soft smile and went back to her paperwork. I wandered between the shelves, fingertips grazing spines like old friends. They'd rearranged the layout, but the back corner, my corner, was still the quietest part of the store. That's where I used to hide after school, reading poetry while pretending to dust. I stood there for a long time staring at a worn copy of Mary Oliver's Devotions. I opened it to a random page and there it was, one line underlined in pencil, faint but sure. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The lump in my throat surprised me. Not sadness, not regret, just recognition. The girl who had underlined that line was still somewhere inside me, waiting. I bought the book, of course. And as I checked out, I asked the woman behind the counter if the store was still owned by the Haskins family. She shook her head. No, they sold it last year. New owners are looking to sell again. Can't afford the upkeep. Something in me clicked. 2 weeks later, I signed the paperwork. I bought the building. Not just the bookstore, the whole damn building. Upstairs, there was an apartment with creaky floors and wide windows that looked out over the town square. I planned to turn it into a writer's loft. The store would stay open, of course, but I had other ideas too. Readings, community nights, maybe even a small press. Not because I needed a project, because I needed a place that still remembered me before I disappeared into someone else's story. This wasn't about nostalgia. It was about return. To the girl who shelved books and dreamed big, to the woman who finally remembered she still could. I called it Heartline Press. Not because I needed to see my name on the letterhead, but because I wanted every woman who walked through that door to know who was behind it. A woman who'd learned the hard way that stories only matter if we're allowed to tell our own. I used the same signature I'd once written beside Jonathan's in ink, thick with compromise, but this time it stood alone. No shared accounts, no co-signers, no permissions needed. Just mine. It started with one idea: publish women's stories that didn't fit inside neat little boxes. Not memoirs full of redemption bows, not sanitized tales of graceful sacrifice. Real stories. Messy, sharp, tender. The ones whispered at wine nights or hidden in journals no one ever read. My first hire was a young editor named Alicia. Sharp-eyed, soft-voiced, with more fire in her ideas than she knew what to do with. She brought in a manuscript 2 weeks later, written by a single mother in Montana who'd never been published. It wasn't polished, but it was powerful, raw and unapologetic. We bought it the same day. 3 months in, we had 6 books in the pipeline. Poetry, essays, even a novella about a grandmother who walks away from her own retirement party and starts hitchhiking across the country. Women began to find us, writers who'd been dismissed, told their voices were too niche, too emotional, too quiet. And each time I signed a contract, I smiled, because this time, I was the one writing them. No hidden clauses, no erasure, no husband behind the curtain. Just women, owning their stories and the space they took up. One afternoon, Alicia asked me why I'd really started the press. I told her the truth. Because for 30 years I ghostwrote someone else's legacy, and now I want to help women write their own. She nodded, like she understood more than she let on. Our office was modest. Second floor, creaky stairs, a crooked window that let in too much wind and just enough light. We kept books stacked everywhere and coffee always brewing. There were plants on every windowsill and quotes scribbled on whiteboards in crooked handwriting. It was nothing like the firm Jonathan built, and it was everything I ever wanted. Not because it was grand, because it was honest, because it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to ask for a seat at the table. I was building the whole damn table myself. The mirror hadn't changed. Same gold frame, same slight crack in the corner where the movers had bumped it 15 years ago. Same soft lighting from the sconce above, casting just enough warmth to soften the lines time had drawn across my face. But the woman staring back? She wasn't the same. Her shoulders weren't slumped from keeping peace. Her jaw wasn't tight from unsaid thoughts. Her eyes, my eyes, were still tired, yes. But they were clear and wide open. I stood there in a soft linen dress the colour of oat milk, barefoot, hair swept back, silver strands catching the light like threadwork. No corset-tight blazer, no polished pearls, no lipstick chosen to match someone else's tie. Just me. The same mirror where I used to rehearse apologies now caught me mid-laugh. I remembered standing here the night of Jonathan's promotion dinner, smoothing the navy silk over my hips, rehearsing compliments I thought might make me visible again. Back then, I'd looked in the mirror searching for approval, wondering if he'd notice me, wondering if I looked worth bringing. Tonight, I wasn't going anywhere, and yet, I felt more radiant than I had in years. I leaned closer. The creases beside my eyes, they came from years of smiling at children, friends, strangers I'd encouraged when no one else did. The softness at my waist, from meals made with love, from late-night bowls of pasta eaten alone in quiet defiance. The silver in my hair, from time, from life, from survival. And the smile? That one was new. Not the smile I wore to keep the peace. Not the smile I offered to smooth over his discomfort or someone else's condescension. This one was mine. Entirely mine. It came from the chest, not the cheeks. It came from knowing, not hoping, not pretending, but knowing I was finally living on my own terms. No more borrowed dreams, no more borrowed dresses, no more dimming my voice to protect someone else's legacy. I touched the mirror lightly, as if to thank it for remembering me, because for years it had watched me vanish, and now it was bearing witness to my return. The reflection was older, softer in places, sharper in others, but for the first time in decades, I recognized her. Caroline, my full name, my full self. Not someone's wife, not someone's mirror, just me. And that was enough, more than enough. The night was clear, and the stars looked closer than they had in years. I sat on the balcony of the upstairs apartment above the bookstore, wrapped in a wool blanket, barefoot, laptop balanced on my knees. The breeze carried the scent of old paper and jasmine from the planter box I'd tended myself. Somewhere below, the last customer of the night was locking the bookstore door. I could hear the soft jingle of the bell. It had taken a year. 1 year since the gala. 1 year since the velvet box I never gave him. 1 year since I walked out of a room that never expected me to leave, and built one of my own. And now I was writing the final page of a book I didn't plan to write, but had always been writing in pieces. In dinner conversations, I swallowed. In contracts, I rewrote and signed away. In mirrors, I stopped looking into. In the quiet choices that accumulated into silence, until I broke it. The book was called Resilience, Women Reclaimed, a collection of stories and portraits. Women like me. Women unlike me. Women who had buried themselves inside roles until they forgot their own names, and then came back anyway. I photographed them in their kitchens, in the woods, in studios they built with their own tired hands. I sat with them, listened, asked questions no one had ever thought to ask, and in each of them, I found pieces of myself. But this last page, this one was mine alone. I scrolled to the final line, the blinking cursor waiting for something that felt true. And I typed, "It took me 30 years to speak my truth, and only one to live it." I stared at it for a long time, then hit save, closed the laptop. That was it. Not an ending, a beginning, quiet and certain. Behind me, the apartment was warm and full of colour. Books stacked on every surface, camera equipment spread across the table, a kettle humming low on the stove. This was my life now. Not curated, not borrowed, not built around someone else's orbit. Mine. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. She was coming to visit next weekend, bringing lemon bars and questions about starting a podcast. I smiled. In the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, and under the stars, barefoot, quiet, free, I whispered my name aloud like a promise. Caroline, whole, awake, unapologetic, and finally, home.